Okay, do you think we're ready? All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is, I think, well, I was waiting. I'm not sure. I think we will be starting some slides soon and sharing those. But if you want to put your name and your affiliation in the chat, it's helpful. There we go. Okay. All right. So welcome to our first WaterTalks webinar, or part of our technical assistance portion or phase of this grant program. I'm going to go over some information about the project team and then some kind of ground rules or ways of using, information on using Zoom and how we're going to run this webinar, and then we'll get started. So next slides. There we go. All right, so my name is Laura Schellenbarger. I'm the Santa Clara River Watershed coordinator, and I work for the County of Ventura. We have a large team, as you can see, working on this, this program. It's been great to have such a deep bench. We have folks from CSU San Bernardino, CSU Northridge, California Rural Water Association, and PlaceWorks. We also, I'd like to mention that we have community-based organizations that have been helping us through this, this many-year, it's been a few years now, effort, such as CAUSE and the Sierra Club and Friends of the Santa Clara River. Today, you'll be hearing from myself, Lynn Rodriguez of Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County, Isabel Min of PlaceWorks, Boykin Witherspoon of CSU San Bernardino, and Holly Alpert of California Rural Water Association. Next. And if you're joining us today from a desktop computer, I wanted to make sure that you have access to the chat window. Since a number of you already put your name in the chat, I assume you've been able to find that fine. But it is in the, if you're on your desktop, it's in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Next. And if you're accessing this webinar through a tablet or a smartphone, you can find the chat window in the upper right corner of the Zoom window, the three dots that say more. It's also where you should be able to find where you can raise your hand as well. If you have a question during the webinar, feel free to type it in the chat. We are monitoring the chat. Spence is monitoring that, or raise your hand. And periodically, we will also pause to allow everybody, those that have questions to unmute and ask questions. We do ask that everybody remain muted during the webinar when you're not speaking. And next, I think I wanted to also point out, if you're having any technical difficulties with the Zoom itself, you can send a chat message to _questions. Ask me, that's Spence, he's waving there, and he's our technical support today, and we'll be able to hopefully help you. And there you go. And then also wanted to point out that this presentation today, you can actually access it right now. You can download it from this link. We're going to post that link also in the chat box. And you can download it after the meeting or during the meeting this webinar, if you'd like to follow along to take notes. And we'll of course be sending it out and telling you how to access it after the fact as well. So don't worry about downloading it right now unless you wanted to use it. Okay, next. All right, so I'd like to give a little background before we get into the content of the training. So what is IRWM? IRWM, or Integrated Regional Water Management, started with the Planning Act of 2002. It provides a framework to collaboratively identify and implement water management solutions on a regional scale that increase regional self-reliance, reduce conflict, and manage water to achieve together social, environmental, and economic objectives. This approach leads to high value projects and investments by considering all interests, providing multiple benefits, and working across multiple jurisdictional boundaries. Since then, since about 2002, various state bonds have provided over $1.5 billion of state funding to advance IRWM and fund multiple benefit projects in the state. IRWM implementation grants awarded to date have resulted in over 800 IRWM projects statewide. And Ventura County's IRWM region is known as Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County. Watersheds Coalition Ventura County falls in the LA Ventura funding area. So we're part of a funding area with 3 IRWM regions, which includes Upper Santa Clara River IRWM and Greater Los Angeles County IRWM program. And to date, Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County has successfully brought in around $94 million of IRWM grant funding, with a local cost share of around $151 million. And that's been for about 42 projects. Next. So more recently, Proposition 1 authorized $150 million in IRWM funding statewide. The LA Ventura funding area with our 3 IRWM regions received $98 million in funding, and $9.8 million of that is specifically to increase involvement of disadvantaged communities and underrepresented communities, including tribes, in the regional water sustainability planning and decision-making process. We will also be discussing some other sources of funding later. Next slide. So I wanted to kind of talk a little about the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program and how it's defined. The state uses specific definitions for DACs and EDAs, economically distressed areas. The state defines a disadvantaged community as a community with an annual median household income that is less than 80% of the statewide annual median household income. Just want to note that throughout this program and working with stakeholders, we prefer to use the term underserved or under-resourced communities, but you'll often see us use the term disadvantaged community since it's a defined a definition used by the state. I also want to point out that this program, the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, is overseen by a task force. Lynn Rodriguez and I serve on that task force. And we also have a local DAC committee that involves a number of stakeholders locally and community-based organizations, many of which I think you are probably a member of that. Many of the people on this webinar attending are part of that DAC committee. I think next. So as part to support and implement the DAC IP program, this Prop 1 funded program, our team of consultants and local NGOs, we created the WaterTalks program. It's a public program to increase engagement and community involvement in sustainable water management in our funding area. Next. And today, purpose of today's training, you'll learn how to get involved in the IRWM process by creating and by generating and describing project ideas for your community, organizing community support, identifying approaching agencies, to identify partners, possible partner agencies, identifying technical needs and resources, funding sources, and navigating funding requirements. So that's the goal of today's webinars. And we have actually both a morning and afternoon session. Next slide. So the morning session, we're going to be focusing on developing project proposals for different types of funding sources. In the afternoon session, we will take you through submitting a proposal. So it'll be kind of going through the steps of submitting a proposal using one specific tool. And at this point, I know I wanted to open it up if there are any questions about what I've so far talked about. And I think we also have a poll that we were going to launch. So if there's any questions in the chat. So far, I'm not seeing any. And we're going to launch this poll to give you guys a minute to respond to that. Just trying to test if you're paying attention, obviously, and awake this morning. Okay. Are there any questions? Not seeing any. Okay. It looks like the poll number of people responded.
We have six people have answered so far.
All right, last call.
Let's go.
Oh, there we go. then you see it go up all of a sudden. A little pressure. Okay.
Okay, we'll cap it there. So time travel takes the lead. Well, most people want to time travel. I'm going to read through.
I think the big. I wanted to follow up to that. Is it forward or backwards? But, okay. Are you going to be sharing results of the second question? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So let's see some of the answers that people wanted to gain from today. Learn about water projects and grants, and more about possible water-related projects that can be funded. Would like to receive assistance with applying for a grant. Learn how to design proposals that meet community and environmental needs related to water availability and conservation, and where to solicit funding for it.
Okay.
A better understanding of funding resources and how they apply to disadvantaged communities, how agencies can support those communities, understanding next steps. Yep.
All right. Well, you're on the right place then. So that's great. I think that we are going to the next kind of section of this webinar. We're going to be talking about generating and describing project ideas. So I'd like to invite Boykin Witherspoon from CSU to join us.
Hello.
Introduce him. He's the Director of Water Resources and Policy Institute at CSU San Bernardino.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. In this first, Spence, we can go to the next slide. Sorry. Yeah. So in this next section, we're going to talk about some of the results from a series of surveys and interviews that we did over the spring and summer. And we kind of had two ways that we went about it. One is we did kind of a traditional survey. I would imagine many of you participated in that, like a questionnaire survey. And then we also interviewed key utilities and agencies within the county. And so what I'm going to do is just go over some of the results from that, but also the reason we did this is so that we could begin to look at the strengths and the needs of the communities. And one of the ideas that we have is to use some of the answers and some of the summaries from these interviews and surveys to help identify what kinds of projects would be the most beneficial and the most well supported in the communities. And believe it or not, that has not really happened a whole lot in California in IRWIN planning processes. So I think we have a real opportunity here to, listen and learn from the communities and help that guide what kind of projects the county would support moving forward. So what you're looking at here is the kind of a summary of the strengths. There were a series of questions about strengths. So this is kind of a summary. And then on the right, you're looking at what's called a word map. And that's, we had mentioned the user needs assessment report, which I believe Spence is going to show you where to get it later. But this is how we're presenting some of the information from the surveys and interviews in the report. And basically for the series of questions, the words that are the biggest near the center are the words that people said the most. So it kind of gives you a snapshot of kind of what people are thinking and how many people are thinking about it. But one of the things that I took from this, the strong sense of community, the green space, opportunities, the service programs, variety of resources, it's a very, very positive perception of the communities. And so I think that was kind of something that we took out of this. It looks like Ventura County, people like to live there. And that's, again, it was just a very kind of positive response to what the communities thought their strengths were. Spence, we can go to the next one. And so we asked some questions about general issues and opportunities, and then some more specific to water. These are kind of the summaries of some of the answers from the specific water related questions. And you'll see most of this is dealing with clean, safe, affordable drinking water. And so that's, most of those bullets deal with one of those three things. And the good news there is that that's a high priority for the state. And so, one of the things to take away from this is, the issues and opportunities that you all are seeing in Ventura County are in alignment with what the state is seeing also and wants to support moving forward. I thought one of the things in there on that fourth bullet, water availability for fire suppression and agriculture, obviously Ventura County and agriculture, but fire suppression and water is an opportunity that we have because it's there's communities that can't meet some of the requirements for fire suppression. So there's an opportunity for project development. We can go to the next one, Spence. So this is an actual question and answer. So this is not a summary. So the actual question was, are there concerns about drinking water quality? And there was a majority of the respondents said yes. And then we had a follow-up question that asked, what? And taste and contaminants and colors and odors were some of the more detailed things that people were concerned about with drinking water quality. But all in all, the county has very good water quality. And these are kind of secondary constituents when you're looking at taste and color and odors, but it's something that can be worked on. So I think the good news is, in terms of the quality of the water in Ventura County, it's very good, but it could actually get better with some of these things like taste and color and odors. We can go on to the next one. So as I had mentioned, we asked some very specific questions about water and concerns and opportunities with water, but we also asked some more general questions about issues and opportunities. And one of the ideas here is most of the funding sources, and a lot of them that we're going to talk about today, are looking for multi-beneficial projects, projects that have multiple benefits. And so if we can start looking at what some of the other kind of crossover water related issues and concerns are, we might be able to better craft and understand opportunities for multi-beneficial projects. And so, some of them were things like homelessness was very important to people, being able to address that. Affordable housing, again, related to the prior issue, and flooding and fire, basically cutting off communities, and also the debris flows that are prone in that county. The idea of not overbuilding. And so all of those have some relationship to water, but again, it gives us an opportunity when we're looking at potential projects to look at multiple benefits and what kind of non-water specific opportunities and concerns do we have in the county. So Spence, we can go on to the next one. This again is not a summary. This is the response to actual questions, and this is kind of getting at how do the community members, the constituents, the receivers of water services, how much do they know about and how much do they participate in water related planning? Because as Laura had mentioned in her opening, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars brought to Ventura County that went through some kind of planning project development process. And what was generally indicated is there's not a lot of knowledge, and there's not a lot of current participation in water related planning. And then the second one is looking at, do the communities know what to do? And so, I actually look at those as opportunities, because we obviously have a gap in understanding and knowledge and participation according to this survey, but it's also an opportunity. And for example, there could be projects proposed to help organize communities or groups of communities to be better prepared to participate in water related planning. So that's the way that I look at this is, not a lot of people are participating, but that's an opportunity to get more people to participate. Spence, we can go on to the next one. Again, we had about 618 surveys in the county, and nearly half agreed that their local government was addressing infrastructure and beautification issues. And I think that kind of goes back to that first slide I showed, that in general, the communities have a really positive perception of their communities in the county. And this second one relates to what the slide we were just on, where the respondents felt that their voices were being heard in kind of general community planning. And 42% of them were aware of their water provider. Now, if you think about that, that means the other portion don't really know who their water service provider is. And so again, I see those as kind of opportunities for potential projects that could respond to that issue. And Laura had mentioned the IRWIM program, the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, as a vehicle for water related planning activity. And very few people that we contacted were even aware of what that is. So again, that's another opportunity to improve that percentage, to get more people aware. And as a part of this project, our teams are actually developing a series of, I'm just going to call them pamphlets for now, but they would be available on the web and things like that, that are going to be kind of handbooks, like pocket guides to how to participate as a community member in an IRWIM. So as we roll out into the spring, we'll be sure and let groups like this know that those resources are going to be available on, again, kind of little pocket guides on how to participate in the various programs. And we can move to the next one.
Hey, Boykin, before we move on to the projects and programs identified, I just want to point out something I think we forgot to mention is that the needs assessment survey, the community results that we've been talking about, don't actually include the tribal engagement yet. So that our tribal engagement is still ongoing. And so I just wanted to be clear that the surveys that we've been talking about, the results are from surveying disadvantaged communities, but don't yet include some of that input from our tribal engagement process.
Yeah, that's correct. It's on a separate track. So again, one of the main reasons that we were doing this this user needs assessment was to kind of find out what's important to people, what communities would support, but then also more kind of on the interview side with the water service providers and agencies to begin to identify potential projects that we might be able to move forward with. And the list here is kind of the beginning of that. And so I guess the way that I would think about these lists, these next two slides, is if you see something in here that you're interested in, or you know that your community could benefit from, these are things that we learned in our user needs assessment that would have general support. And so, like that last one, developing and promoting in-home water filter incentives and tap water testing programs. I mean, if one of you as community members or a community-based organization is interested in that, reach out to us and we can help you develop that into a project proposal for your community. And the second one, improving education and policies, very similar. And so I think we're going to talk more about project types, but again, it doesn't have to be necessarily the construction of water infrastructure as the result of the project. The projects can also be education or testing, monitoring programs. Spence, we can go to the next one. And, so again, this is just a continuation of that list. I think some of these are more traditional, like the development of programs to move from septic to sewer is really important. Projects like more dedicated riverbed cleaning, reutilization of unutilized spaces to create more green space. So again, as you're looking at these project and program ideas, if something in here is of interest or would benefit your community, reach out to us and we can help you develop that into a potential project proposal. And we're going to talk more later on in the presentation about, and especially this afternoon, about what do you need to create a project proposal for one of these planning activities. I think that was my last one. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, there was one more. This one. So that was potential projects that we gleaned from the interviews and surveys. What you're looking at here is exactly what DWR will allow. And so our language was kind of much more descriptive in terms of what a project might be. But these items on that first category, general categories, so needs assessment, that we've completed that already, but that's one of the things that can be done. Education programs, community outreach, and organization. Again, we're developing, again, I'm going to call them pamphlets for how communities can better participate in the IRWIN. There can be projects based around facilitation, creating avenues where communities have better communication with their water service providers. There's just kind of general technical assistance. For some of the water service providers, the idea of helping them with their organization and their operations and maintenance and their budgeting, and how do you keep a small water company in the black. And then more traditional technical assistance where you could look at site assessment, like a wellhead assessment or something like that. We can do income surveys to help qualify communities for different funding sources. And then the actual preliminary design of infrastructure that would be built, and the environmental compliance and all the issues that go around with applying for money to actually construct something. So that's kind of the technical version of what's allowed in terms of a project. And then those prior two slides were some examples that are more specific to what we learned in Ventura County. So Spence, I think that was my last one.
Thanks, Boykin. I think we just thought we'd open it up for any questions on, for Boykin and his section before we moved on. If there are any, I don't see any in the chat. You're welcome to ask questions at any time, but if there's any questions or if anyone has any.
Isabel, this is Lynn. While people are thinking if they have any questions, I wanted to add to what Boykin said about this last slide and just clarify that the funding activity types are related to the $9.8 million Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program grant. We're not only going to be talking about that today, we will actually be talking about sources of funding to implement projects. So I just wanted to clarify that there is a limited amount of money for across our funding area for this engagement piece and the training that we're doing today and technical assistance and all of that. But there's another world of funding out there that we'll be covering in some future slides and also discussing a little bit more this afternoon. So I just wanted to clarify what this is about.
Okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions at the moment pertaining to what Boykin presented. So I think we can keep going, and of course, at any time, feel free to put
We put a link to the needs. Sorry, interrupt. Did we put a link to the that community needs assessment report in the chat? Did I see that?
We will do that.
It is available, right? No.
Yeah, it's online, and I was planning to share that at the end of this presentation, but if
Yeah, maybe at
you,
the end is fine. We can do that then.
Okay. If one of you on the team want to drop it into the chat, that's fine now too.
Okay, I think I'm up next. Thank you, Laura and Boykin, for introducing everything so far and getting everybody caught up on what this program is about. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I guess I already started talking about this, about what who can apply for these funds and what are these funds for. The eligible applicants for disadvantaged community involvement funding are public agencies. Many of you will represent public agencies, also nonprofit organizations and the NGOs and CBOs that we're working with, public utilities like water agencies, federally recognized Indian tribes, and state Indian tribes listed in the National Native American Heritage Commission's tribal consultation list, and also mutual water companies. And I believe we have representatives from almost all those categories today in this training. So hopefully we will be able to provide you with the kind of information that you need to get engaged and stay engaged in this process. So next slide. So we wanted to share a few specific examples with you about some of the ways that funding can be utilized to enhance water quality, to improve water supply, to manage and treat stormwater, to beautify and improve neighborhoods in areas where there's a lot of flooding or lack of access to outdoor opportunities. So just wanted to give a couple of examples, and these examples come from both our area, Ventura County, but also there's a few in LA County that I wanted to share. And the funding for these projects has come from different sources. They're not all from the same funding sources, and you'll learn later today, and particularly in the, later this morning, what some of the opportunities are right now for additional funding. So a couple of examples that you see here on the screen. There's a project that iron and manganese treatment project, which I'll talk a little more about, that's been put together by the United Water Conservation District and is receiving funding already from Proposition 1. And the El Rio groundwater recharge project, which is also receiving IRWM grant funding from Prop 84, which is the proposition prior to Prop 1 with IRWM funding. Both of these projects are in the El Rio area. And next slide. And this is more of the projects that are sort of related to some of the interests of this group. There's a stormwater capture project in LA County. There's the Elmer Avenue Green Street project in Los Angeles County. Some of you may have heard of that before, which is has multiple benefits. And then advanced metering infrastructure, which is something that is being done by the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District down in the northern part of LA County, near our boundary with Ventura County. But also we have the agencies in our county that are using this AMI metering, which actually can lead to more efficient use of water and provide more data. So next slide. So those were examples of sort of large and small projects, and I'm going to just walk through a couple of them. On the water quality, you saw a lot of people are concerned about water quality, and some of our groundwater basins have minerals and other constituents that make that render the water less useful on its own. It needs to be blended with other sources. And that's the case for some of the wells operated by the United Water Conservation District, which is a wholesale water agency and manages much of the groundwater in the Santa Clara River area. So a project that was submitted for the first round of Proposition 1, which was 2 years ago, and the project is now underway, is to put together, have a treatment plant installed that will remove some of those constituents and make it possible for more of that water to be usable for beneficial uses. And it'll be treating about 3,500 gallons per minute. And the funding for that project, this is one of the bigger projects. Total cost of the project is $9.58 million, and $2.5 million of that is coming from Prop 1 Round 1 funding. So that's an example of a project that benefits the community through improving the quality of the groundwater that's delivered to parts of the El Rio, 9 acres and beyond. Next slide, please. And then another project, which is a much smaller project, and an example of something we might see coming out of this process in the DACI grant, is the El Rio groundwater recharge project. Some of you on this call probably are familiar with this. There was a lot of localized flooding in the community of El Rio, and the stormwater program, the county stormwater program, identified an opportunity to install pervious pavement in the curb and gutter areas to both capture that extra water flowing during storms, but it also provides a sort of natural treatment process, and that water then infiltrates into the groundwater, so that actually enhances the groundwater supply and if you will, cleans the water as it's going down. That was a much more modest project funded through Proposition 84, probably about 5 years ago. The total cost of that project was $1.3 million, and the grant funding was $962,000. And that project has been completed and has been increasing. When there are additional storm flows coming through that area, it increases the water available in the groundwater basin. Next project, or next slide. So these next slides are in LA County, and so I don't have direct personal knowledge about them, but we wanted to share some other examples of larger scale. This is quite a large scale project, but as you can see, and as you can probably imagine, with climate change and increasing flooding events that we've been seeing, the need to and the value of capturing some of that extra storm flow, treating it and infiltrating it into the ground on a larger scale than the last slide example is really, really beneficial. And in areas like LA County in particular, where there's a significant amount of impervious surface area, these kinds of projects are really important to stop the flows, running out to the ocean that pick up trash and other contaminants, and actually find ways to benefit the local groundwater basins. So this project by the County of Los Angeles has a amount of $2 million in grant funding, and that was a Prop 1 Round 1 project as well from our neighboring IRWM region, the Greater LA, the GLAC region. And then, significant matching funds with a total estimated cost of $17.7 million. We may be seeing smaller scale, but similar types of projects happening in Ventura County as we move ahead with implementing the Stormwater Resources Plan. And Laura wears two hats. She's also works in the stormwater program for the county. And so you may have met her in another capacity, but these are the kinds of strategies we're going to have to implement as well as part of our recently adopted stormwater permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So water quality improvement and capturing additional water for beneficial uses is a really important type of project that some of the bigger agencies are looking at. Okay, next slide. So this project, and I know that we have some people, I believe we have Anna Karen and there's maybe a couple other people from Tree People on this call. If you're not familiar with Tree People, they're a very long-standing community organization that is actively engaged in bettering communities in Los Angeles. Started out as tree planting back when I was a kid living in LA, but they have some amazing programs, and they're helping with the GLAC region's DACI program and doing a lot of the outreach and education. I don't know how much of a role Tree People had exactly in this project, but I know that they're working on similar projects across the Southern California or LA area. This is an example of, you could see in the before and after picture, floods flows down an alleyway, causing a nuisance and problems for people living adjacent to that area. And they were able to capture storm flows from about 20-acre area and diverting it off to more of a green alley that's actually a pleasant and beautiful place to be, and a safer walkway for the neighborhood, including drought-tolerant plantings and educational signage. And the potential to capture and treat and infiltrate 1.3 million gallons of stormwater. So that's a substantial project. And the total cost of that was very modest, $550,000. And the funding came from Proposition O in I believe the city of LA. I think it says the city of LA, and then also the Council for Watershed Health. So that's a really good win-win project that is benefiting a community that I can't tell. I believe it was a disadvantaged community. So that's a great example. Next slide.
Lynn, if I could add to what you'd said on the previous slide about larger scale regional stormwater capture projects that we might see more of in Ventura County, I'd also add we will likely see probably more of these green streets type projects as well in Ventura County, because it'll take a combination of both regional projects and these more dispersed green streets, infiltration type projects for the meeting probably requirements of our new MS4 permit and watershed management plans, as well as all the additional multi-benefits that they bring to the communities. So
since you brought that up, did you want to say anything about how you see, the direction that we're going with creating these watershed management plans for different areas and the opportunity for engagement in that?
I think it's too early to really say much about it, that there was the new stormwater permit, municipal stormwater permit was adopted in July, and all I can say is the permittees have decided to develop watershed management plans, and that will involve a pretty robust stakeholder involvement engagement process to develop those and come up with a suite of solutions and how to meet, that's related to stormwater water quality. But obviously to treat water quality, some of the pollutants in our stormwater, one of the most cost-effective ways and has additional benefits is for infiltration and capturing that for stormwater recharge as a resource. So I think that's just something we'll see as that develops in the next couple of years.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Next slide. Yes. So advanced metering infrastructure, we don't have to spend a lot of time focusing on this, but this is definitely an important tool that we have available to us, a technology that replaces old manually read water utility meters with AMI or smart meters that actually can share out data to you on your smartphone, help you identify more quickly if there's a leak or a problem, and gives you feedback immediately about how much water you're using, so that you can try to reduce your use in your home or your business. This is being used on the Oxnard Plain by agricultural users. So it has broad potential use or actual use. City of Oxnard, I believe, has retrofitted all their meters with smart meters, and City of Ventura is, I think, in the process of doing the same. And probably over the next few years, everybody will be on these meters. It's a fairly big process, I think, to do the conversion, but once it's done, it provides valuable data to the customer as well as to the water utility. Yeah, you're gonna say something?
I was going to say, one of the goals is not one of the goals of advanced AMI also then to have different tiers for opportunities for different billing structures for water users. So different rates for indoor versus outdoor water use, and opportunities for having different rate structures.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So that was another example of a project that was funded by Round 1 by the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. And I'll just point out that part of the whole funding area, and actually just across California, IRWM regions, which are different sizes and different configurations across the state, often work together across their boundaries to do beneficial projects. And one of the projects right now that is also in Prop 1 is an intertie between Las Virgenes Municipal Water District and the Callegas Municipal Water District, which allows for those two entities to benefit from one another's supply capacity should one of them have a problem in their system. So it's an emergency kind of backup method, and it also provides benefits. I think there's some water quality benefits associated with that project. So we do work collaboratively across our boundaries, both in that part of LA County and then in the upper Santa Clara watershed that we have some joint efforts. So that project, you can see that's another big one, but they only requested 1.5 million from the grant, but it cost a total of, and Las Virgenes is a fairly large water agency, cost a total of $10 million to $10.5 million. So that's kind of a big project. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that concludes the information about project types, and just wanted to give you a flavor. It's certainly not all encompassing, but you get the idea. So I think now it's time for questions, Isabel.
Yeah, so if there are any questions about any of the projects we presented, we have a little bit of time in our schedule, so we're happy. We don't want it to be completely one-sided conversation. So if folks have any comments, are familiar with those projects, I don't know if any of the participants here, I know we have a number of community groups, partook or are familiar with the projects that we discussed. We'd be happy to hear more about them if you're willing to share, or if you have any other questions about them, the group can try to answer them. There's a question I just saw in the chat. and that is, will IRWM fund scientific studies? And I think,
sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just chime in really quick and say that the IRWM implementation grant funds are dedicated toward at least some of that money for a particular project has to go to immediate physical results of some sort. So water supply enhancement, water quality improvement, habitat restoration. So the IRWM implementation funding does not typically cover scientific studies. The planning grants did, and we were able to receive planning grant funding early on in Prop 1 to do groundwater studies and to study water quality from livestock operations in the Ventura River, some other things like that. They do, though, the IRWM grant does fund decision tools, which I know that isn't really the same thing necessarily as a scientific study, but it does support, how you make decisions based on the information that you have available in selecting projects.
Yeah.
There are lots of other funds out there that do fund studies, and you can sometimes put a technical feasibility study in with your implementation project, but it's not really, the scientific study to me means something a little different than that. So Laura, did you want to?
Yeah, just what you said about does fund decision support tools. So I think that this is a question, and like you said, some implementation projects we funded had kind of a study or a pilot, like if you can call it a pilot project or a pilot study as part of an implementation. Sometimes that can be then eligible for implementation funding. But like Lynn said, the current IRWM Prop 1 funding is more for implementation. But the DAC, the funding we're going to talk about also for the technical assistance that right now is available for disadvantaged communities. There is some planning, that like Boykin had talked about earlier, that can fund some planning or site assessment, potentially some studies. I think it really depends on the specifics of what you're interested in. And that's something that you can definitely reach out to our team and talk more about and ask more the specifics of the project you're thinking about. And even later today, this afternoon, that's something we can talk about like openly at the second session, maybe.
Yeah. So I believe Tony Emmerich is on. I'm not sure if he wants to add anything. He may have tuned in after I talked about the iron and manganese project, but I just wanted to give United an opportunity if they want to say anything about that project.
And I know we didn't have this as a poll, so I don't know how to really get feedback, but I was curious, for those that are tuning in, part of this webinar, have you heard of any of these projects, or some of these projects the first time you've heard of them? I think that'd be kind of an interesting thing to hear feedback on, but you want to put in the chat or something like, these were the first time I've heard of this project, or
yeah, Dina said she's heard of them.
Great. That's good. Great if you've heard of them, and if you haven't, we're happy to give some ideas. Great. Okay.
I see Tony there and is nodding, so I don't know if you did want to
maybe it's just nodding.
Take Lynn up on her invitation.
Tony, why don't you introduce yourself? Because I think it's another value of these webinars is for people to get to meet some of the water agency folks.
Now I'm unmuted. Good morning. I apologize for, I had a conflicting meeting and wasn't able to join until now. I'm Assistant General Manager with United, and transitioning a little bit more to working with folks on water supply projects. I've had a bit of a different role the past few years, but I don't know if you want to say anything about the iron and manganese project, but that's essentially a a project to make the Oxnard-Hueneme supplemental water system more useful during a wide range of conditions. So it was highlighted during the last multi-year drought that that the water quality made it so that some of the customers could not use the water for their membrane treatment. And so, so this is really a response to that, to allow that system to operate more reliably during water supply challenges and to meet all the water supply requirements. So that system serves part of the city of Oxnard's water, part of the city of Port Hueneme, 10 Islands Beach, Naval Base Ventura County, and several mutual water companies that are along the way. Unfortunately, not Nyland Acres or Garden Acres water systems because of the location, but that's something I guess we could look at in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And Tony has a very deep experience working in a lot of different organizations throughout the county. So we really appreciate his knowledge, and he's been on the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County team since the beginning back in early 2000s. So thank
I
you.
didn't have any gray hair then.
Yeah. All right, I see that Dina has posted thoughts. And we appreciate your thoughts. Did you want to unmute? Are there any questions in there, Dina, or you just want us to see your ideas? Oh. Okay.
Dina said.
Oh, you have to unmute her. Sorry, Spence, can you do that?
Good morning. Ooh,
Oh,
I have my husband on my other computer. Ooh,
yeah, you're gonna have to
it's-
mute yourself on one of them. No? Well,
Spence, I don't know, maybe it's not. Let me try
Okay.
it again.
Yeah, she is unmuted, but
Try it
I mean-
again, Dina. Well, looks like it's not working, but sorry about that, Dina, maybe.
okay. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Dina, in the chat, and we're capturing the chat from this.
Hey, Lynn, this is Boykin. We have in the past used Prop 1 DAC money on legal services for communities, but it was more dealing with consolidation legal issues. But I think that would be something that you know, we would need to get permission from DWR, you know, for that kind of service. But we've done legal services in the past.
Okay, thank you. All right, are we about ready to move on to the next segment?
Yeah, I don't see any other questions or comments right now. So maybe I'll just speak of it a little bit about community support, just more generally, and then turn it back over, Lynn, to you. So I think, and I believe many here have already worked with communities. A lot of the projects Lynn presented, a lot of the folks at this meeting are community groups. So I think this is, you know, information that most people know, but just a quick mention about the importance of community support, not just engagement or outreach, you know, informing community groups about projects, but working with communities for some of these different opportunities to actually develop the projects themselves. And that is kind of the focus of some of this work with the WaterTalks DAC IP program. So maybe next slide, Spence, we'll just kind of hit on a few even if a project has been conceptualized, that there's also the importance of continuing that process through design and implementation. And why? Because it both keeps the project meeting the community needs that were identified earlier. So we presented some of the findings of the needs assessment, and if projects are evolving out of hearing about community concerns, it's just really important throughout the life of the project design and implementation to ensure that stakeholders are still on board and knowing what's happening. Getting input before, during the needs, during sign development. There are multiple ways of doing that. And then again, for community members who may not be directly involved with the project, just to make sure information is available about what's happening, just kind of the more informational sharing of about what's going on. So next slide, Spence. Thank you. Again, there's just a lot of benefits, especially with some of the kind of projects building on some initial ideas and kind of being maybe multi-phase projects to really continue having community support and opportunities to get involved at different phases of a project. Next slide. The outreach or engagement can include a kind of wide range of stakeholders, many of which have been involved in this project. Both pretty focused organizations working in disadvantaged communities, but also a much wider range that can be involved, including educational institutions, churches or faith-based organizations, health, obviously health and social service providers, especially is related to water quality and public health and safety, businesses, elected and other government representatives, just larger members of the general public, and last but not least, water and wastewater providers, which we're going to talk about more in detail as it relates to the different funding sources. Next slide. And there are a number of tools. I know a lot of you have received the various announcements, e-blasts. As part of this earlier part of the WaterTalks program, we sent hard copy newspapers, interactive materials in the mail to thousands of households in the disadvantaged and the DACs in Ventura County. So, it's definitely recommended to use a wide range of tools and make sure that, not just one approach is used, given people have different capabilities to use digital or to have access to information, virtual meetings, being one tool. Of course, that's a lot of what we've been doing lately, but, I just wanted to mention that we're also well aware, and folks should be, that, there needs to be a wide range of opportunities. And it is harder to do door-to-door outreach lately. This is actually an informational pop-up during the pandemic that, kind of informed people about a local park project and was, it was able to be kind of done at a distance. And so it's been a little trickier lately, but I know a lot of folks are doing it. And we do have a couple of the partners that worked on the first phase of the outreach in Ventura County as part of the WaterTalks project. So I saw members from CAUSE and Friends of the Santa Clara River, both here, and Tree People, of course, having done a lot of the work in the greater LA region. So they, all of those groups have, really supported the outreach efforts and really getting the word out about these opportunities. And if you go to the next slide, Spence. there's a huge benefit to having worked with the local groups. And I know I've spoken with both CAUSE and Friends of the Santa Clara River about today kind of being, you know, a more focused effort on access to funding for community groups and agencies and other organizations, but that we do intend to continue to work with them on doing larger, more community accessible outreach as part of this project. So we'll use some of the materials that we're sharing today, but be a little more community accessible in terms of the time of the outreach and the types of materials. So the kinds of things that we did do in the first rounds or the earlier phases of WaterTalks, that will continue, and we'll be putting more information about those events and the materials and working with those groups, CAUSE and Friends of the Santa Clara River, to do more community based outreach. And I know that Tree People is doing something similar, you know, in the greater Los Angeles County region and in the Santa Clara River area, so county. So we'll move to having Lynn speak about the water agencies, the agency section. We do, you know, generally, if community groups are interested, and I think CSU is something that they know pretty well about, suggesting appropriate agencies for community groups to work with in terms of applying for funding for water related projects. And the different funding sources have different requirements in terms of who can apply. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that, you know, in the WaterTalks funding sources this afternoon. But I think I'll turn it over to Lynn now, just about agencies, types of agencies, and then the, specifically water and wastewater organizations.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. Okay, Spence, next slide. Thank you. So it's already been emphasized, I think, by almost everybody that all of the things that we do to manage and improve our water resources in the area is done collaboratively with other people, with other entities. And none of us can really do it alone. So in this section, we're going to highlight some of the agencies that you can collaborate with that can actually provide assistance to smaller communities or smaller projects that might not have the capacity to do it on their own, or just, you know, for planning purposes and to work together. So some of the agencies that you can reach out to and work with, they can help you with community support, gathering, you know, customers in their service area or other community organizations. They can help with data collection, which can be a fairly challenging and costly to do. They can help with needs assessments and site assessments, and that's in this case, you're going to hear more from Cal Rural Water, who actually that's a really important part of some of the service they provide. Helping with project development, helping you find the source of funding for a project, and helping fill out grant applications. So that's all about really what we're here for today, is to talk about how you can access some of those helpful services. And, you know, we can collaborate across multiple entities and platforms to make these things more successful and to resolve some of the challenges more quickly. And I think it's also important for people to feel that the organizations are working with are trusted and can really have their best interests at heart. So that's the cornerstone of integrated regional water management is collaboration and working together and building those relationships and trust over time. And we have a lot of that in Ventura County with our water agencies and our NGOs and our cities and other organizations. We're gonna, next slide. We're gonna spotlight some categories of agencies that can help. Obviously, there are state and federal agencies, many of them have offices in our county. and we have access to the support from them when needed. They're also sometimes the regulatory authority, so understanding the regulations and working collaboratively to resolve challenges is really important. There's local water providers. Probably some of you are aware that we have very many water districts in Ventura County. We have about 160, ranging from the very small mutual water companies all the way up to the larger municipal water agencies that wholesale water, and a lot in between. We have a number of wastewater districts across the county, and there's an important nexus between wastewater, which can be treated and used for beneficial uses, and the water supply industry. So we're seeing more and more recycled water projects and other opportunities to utilize wastewater for beneficial purposes like wetlands and other things. There's a number of other countywide agencies. An example would be the Resource Conservation District, which is listed at the bottom. They are a very big partner for us in our IRWM program. They're able to secure a lot of funding and do a lot of really great projects benefiting agriculture and urban landscapes and water quality. There's also the countywide, the flood control agency, which is called Watershed Protection for Ventura County, and also the countywide stormwater quality program. Those two programs, they're housed out of the county of Ventura, do a tremendous amount of work in collaborating with not only in developing infrastructure, but also in managing resources and managing, for example, invasive weeds and other things. So we work very closely with stormwater and water and flood management. There's all the local cities, and that includes not just the water utilities in the city, but also the planning agencies, the land use planning agencies. There's a lot of benefit there. And there's lots of other county service areas and other municipal things like the municipal advisory committees that are in some communities across the unincorporated area, which includes the El Rio 9 Acres community. So those are examples of some agencies that you have probably already worked with in the past, or can work with in the future. Next slide. So we have a lot, as I said, a lot of water providers. The important first step of our grant back a couple of years ago was to identify all of our underserved communities that meet the requirements of or that fit in as disadvantaged communities as defined by the state, which is a median household income designation. And so put together these agencies, and that you can see by this list, there's a lot of them. A lot of them are really small. Some of them you may never have heard of before, very small mutual water companies. And then the cities and the larger water agencies that serve those disadvantaged communities or underserved communities that we prefer to refer to them as. And there's 9 areas within the county that we identified based on that income metric. And those communities include Casita Springs, El Rio and 9 Acres, Saticoy, the Ventura Avenue area, Oxnard, Fillmore, Santa Paula, and Piru. I think I didn't leave anybody out. There's 9. And not to say that the projects and programs and efforts that we're making are only going to help people that live within those boundaries. I mean, there's certainly opportunity for this program to have broader beneficial use, but the whole purpose is to identify where there's gaps in the needs for the underserved communities, gaps in the resources, gaps in the capacity for planning, gaps in knowledge and understanding, or just an old system that needs upgrading, where the resources are lacking. So that's really why we have a disadvantaged community involvement program is across the state. It was identified when Prop 1 and actually Prop 84 too were being developed, that we needed to really take a focused effort to make sure that all communities have access to what they need to produce reliable, clean drinking water supplies. So this is the list of the agencies that you can reach out to. Some of you are actually here representing these agencies. And this is just sort of the example or the list of who they are. And that's all on our website. You can see the link. Next. And some of them can partner with you potentially on projects if you are interested. Similarly, we have the wastewater districts, and there's a total of 17 across the county, but only less than that actually serve the communities that we're focusing on this grant. And some of them have projects that will obviously benefit the underserved communities. And you're probably familiar with some of them. The city of Ventura is looking at potable water reuse. And there's projects in the city of Oxnard, a very large advanced water purification project that is and will be producing even more wastewater usable for agriculture and urban landscapes. So these are going to be benefiting all of the communities, some of the underserved communities in the county. Next slide. So the larger water service providers that have a little more capacity and staffing and engineers and hydrologists on their staff and planners and others that can help. In the case of a smaller system that lacks the resources to do the planning or to design the project, you can certainly approach your water service provider for help. That happens, it happens all the time. Some of the, like for example, United Water Conservation District has stepped in to help mutual water companies in the past when they've had a challenge, help, emergency interties or some other assistance. During droughts, the opportunity is there for interties when wells, groundwater levels run low, and there might be cases where wells actually run dry. Working together with a larger water provider that has other sources of water can be very helpful. And the same with the wastewater districts. Of course, their sewer infrastructure, they can be a resource as well. And somebody who you would turn to if there were overflows or problems in your community from wastewater. Why don't we go to the next slide? So in addition to the water and wastewater agencies, we sort of alluded to some of the other services available to you that through the County of Ventura. We talked about, there's the Public Works Agency, and under Public Works, the last one is watershed protection. A lot of collaboration happens there in the stormwater program and in groundwater management. You're probably familiar with the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, and they are working out of the County of Ventura watershed protection, flood control responsibilities, and also the county continuum of care, which is all the county organizations, or it kind of knits together all the organizations in the county, I should say, that provide support and services for those experiencing homelessness. And we're working with them on this grant to identify where there might be some unmet needs for water and sanitation and ways to help with water quality in those camps. Stormwater quality program at the county. I should probably let Laura explain this because that's the program that she's working on. And maybe I'll come back to that and give you a chance to do that, Laura. There's also all the local municipalities, the cities that you can reach out to, and the RCD, as I mentioned previously. And you'll see these links up at the right-hand corner of your screen. Laura, did you want to say anything about the stormwater program and some of the work that you do? Because there's a lot of nexus to what.
I guess I would just say the countywide stormwater program, probably the best way to get in touch with that program is just through your local municipality, since the countywide program is made up of the city stormwater programs working collaboratively. So the best avenue is just through your local city or county unincorporated stormwater program.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me that it's that's also a collaborative program.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. So for those of you that haven't tried to avail yourself of the help of a local agency, there's many ways that you can sort of get in and get the help you need. One is to have somebody introduce you to the right person. I know that some public agencies have a reputation as being bureaucracies that are hard to understand, but really it's just people working on the programs they work on, and there's having a direct connection or an introduction from someone maybe makes that a little bit easier. Also, a sort of a popular way where constituents throughout the county get help is they reach out to their city council member or their member of the board of supervisors representing their area, and they can help connect you to the right services. If you're reaching out to, if you're an individual citizen and you want to reach out to your mutual water company, those of you that work for mutuals know you don't have a lot of staff or maybe even any staff. So just something to know, it takes maybe a little bit of work to find the right people to talk to at a mutual water company if you're not familiar with who to reach out to. Many of them are, as I'm sure some of you know, residents that are on the board, and they're the people that keep the operation running, maybe with some technical support. So the larger agencies obviously have staff, they have a website. It's a little easier to find them and to reach out to them. If you're living in the unincorporated area, there's different ways, reaching out to the local water service provider or the county supervisor, or to the municipal advisory committee, which we have, I believe, for almost all the unincorporated areas. There's a MAC, and that's a good way to get information or a starting point. And then, it's important to, if you want to talk about your project and call people and get support, because having the support from those agencies, whether it's a city water utility or the county board of supervisors or a planning agency or any other water agency, it's important to be able to share with them what it is you need, what you're looking for, what kind of help you need, and they can help you, but you have to be able to advocate for your project. So, but basically, essentially, this is just saying that agencies can be your ally when you need help and leverage the work that you want to get done. Next slide. So that was a question in the needs assessment, was where are community members getting, how are they accessing their government agencies and elected officials to get information? And the number one response to that was through their city council. City councils are probably more accessible. They're just small. Community leaders are often, your neighbor is a city council member, so they're a little bit more accessible, probably, at least if people might think that. There's school districts are a great resource, school board members, county supervisors. Sometimes, you can reach out to your state assembly members or your state senators, and we have very responsive assembly and state representatives in our county and in our congressional districts. So they can really be a source of help as well. Okay, next slide. All right. We have time for questions now? Is there
We do have time. We have time for some questions before we move on. I don't know if we have any for Lynn, Laura, any material shared.
And even if you have an idea of how, a challenge that you have faced with getting support from an agency, or how you have been successful, if you want to share that with the group, that's fine too. All right. Looks like we're ready to move on.
All right, so we're gonna move over to Holly.
Hey everyone, thanks Isabel. My name is Holly Alpert. I am the IRWMP coordinator for the California Rural Water Association, and we're providing technical assistance through the Disadvantaged Communities Involvement Grant. And I'm going to run through just a few slides on how to identify technical needs and then run through a few resources. So next slide, please, Spence. So these slides are by category, what kind of water need you might have. And these are just some examples of needs that you might already be seeing in your water systems or even just at home. And that leads into what kind of technical assistance can be provided. So in terms of water quality, there might be questions about what kind of water sampling and testing needs to be done, what constituents should be tested for, how to find a lab to use, how to collect samples. I hear a lot of questions about sampling schedules. I know those can be really confusing. So those all kind of fall under the umbrella of water quality. And so technical assistance providers that I'll run through in a couple of minutes can provide assistance with anything from actually helping with sampling to just providing input on maybe how to figure out the sampling schedule. Next slide, please. Another category of water technical needs are stormwater projects. This could be anything like assessing site-specific geology, groundwater conditions, how to determine what the drainage area is, site-specific data, soil and infiltration testing, everything that's listed here. Again, technical assistance providers can do some of this work for a water system or a municipality or an irrigation district, or they can provide input on how to do this work. Next slide, please. And then a third category of water technical needs falls under water supply. And some of this was covered a little while ago. Things like developing feasibility studies to assess different options. You might be weighing, for example, whether to drill a new well versus build a new storage tank if you're thinking about your source water supply. And so a feasibility study can help you weigh those options. Other water supply needs might relate to doing the engineering for a project and designs and specs, even input on projects, environmental compliance, CEQA and NEPA regulatory requirements. So again, technical assistance providers can do the work for you or provide input on how to get that work done. And then next slide. This is a list of some of the technical assistance providers out there. And a lot of this has actually already been covered in different ways today. So it's interesting to see how this all comes together. But you know, Lynn talked about this a bit. A primary place to go is to the county and often to county public works departments to get input or assistance in doing some of that technical assistance. The State Water Resources Control Board has a lot of different programs that provide technical assistance, but specifically their Office of Sustainable Water Solutions focuses on disadvantaged communities and small communities and small community water and wastewater providers. And so that's a great place to go, and maybe we can find the link to them and put that in the chat. That'd be a good one to have available to people. But again, the State Water Board has a lot of different programs out there. And then there are other state agencies listed here are your regional water quality control boards, but also the Department of Water Resources, even the Department of Fish and Wildlife. A lot of other state agencies can provide technical assistance on project development, project planning, engineering, things like that. And then there are several technical assistance providers that, well, I'll say are more technical in nature. All of those state agencies definitely have technical staff, but these are more private organizations and universities that have technical staff really devoted to this kind of work. So the group that Boykin works for, the Water Resources and Policy Initiatives at Cal State San Bernardino, California Rural Water Association, the group I work for, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, Community Water Center, Self-Help Enterprises, all of these organizations work in different parts of California. A lot of our organizations work throughout California, and I think all of these work in the Ventura area. So, a lot of us overlap in a lot of ways. We have very similar services that can all be resources for water systems, wastewater providers, and even individual water customers who have questions about this kind of work. Again, local agencies, so counties, municipalities, as Lynn was mentioning, they often, well, usually have paid staff, engineering staff to not only work on their projects, but oftentimes there's some kind of mutual aid agreement where they can provide input and assistance to maybe small water systems. And then again, Lynn mentioned the resource conservation districts. They can be a great source of technical information and also for helping to find funding. So we're going to be talking about this a lot more throughout the day, including in the second session this afternoon. But the current disadvantaged community involvement program funding can be used for technical assistance to help conceptualize a project. It can be also, so let's say you already have a project conceptualized, it can be used for project planning and engineering to develop designs and specs. So we'll run through a lot more of that this afternoon, but just to give you an idea of some of the technical needs out there. Next slide, and I think, yep, that's it. And back to Lynn and Laura.
Okay, thank you, Holly. That was great. Starting to really connect all of the things out there with sort of tying all of this together. And I really appreciate the work that you and other organizations are able to provide in terms of technical guidance and help. So we're going to talk now. We're going to shift gears and focus on a little bit on how to find funding generally. So let's go on to the next slide. So as we've all kind of mentioned previously, sometimes you can get help finding funding for a project through your local water service provider or water utility or city. There's certainly a lot of information out there at the local level. Some of those things are using more localized funding. But a lot of the funding that we need help with is actually coming from larger entities, state and federal grants and loans, local water, project funding. So just want to share some of those resources with you. So starting with funding navigation for California communities. That there's a website, you can see there's websites down here below for each of these 4 categories. Actually, I have never used that one. That's new to me. I have to check that out. There's the US EPA Clearinghouse for Environmental Finance. And more recently, the state of California and actually the federal government both have grant portals that have a great amount of information in them about where you can find funding for your projects. So there's the California grant portal, which was only a couple of years old now. You can type in the kind of funding you're looking for, and it'll feed you the information that you're looking for, if it's whether it's water, or wastewater, or habitat, or whatever kind of project you're interested in. Of course, it's much broader than just water funding. They cover a lot of different things. And then the federal grant portal is just grants.gov without the CA in the middle. And that's a federal site that also has a tremendous amount of information about where funding can be available. And then the last one on the list is the California Financing Coordinating Committee. And they have annual funding fairs. Some of you may have taken advantage of. They've been virtual the last couple of years, but they do they do 3 or 4 or 5 a year, depending on whether they're in person or virtual. And they also produce a handbook. And that handbook is very useful. It actually has tables in it with all kinds of different kinds of projects and where you might find funding for them. So those are a really good starting place if you're have a project and you're looking for a way to get that funded. Laura, you're unmuted. Did you want to talk about some of this?
Sure. Thank you. I think that one thing we just highlight, if you're fairly new to tracking grants and looking for funding, is probably one of the best thing you could do was to start is maybe go to grants.ca.gov, since that includes a lot of the federal grants as well, and do a query. You can search it for the type of projects you might be interested in. And then you can actually set up alerts. Like I think you might have to create like a login with an email address so that you will receive email alerts, and you can also save your query then. So when you go back, you can use the same query tools or parameters that you used and see the grants as they come up. So that's the best, I think, first step. The first one, the funding navigation for California communities, I haven't looked at it extensively, but it does seem to include a lot of the similar same grants that are at grants.ca.gov. And it also is divided, it's kind of a little more like user friendly looking, separating out by different type, like just about 8 different types of grants. And something that interesting I noticed there is it'll show you, so it'll talk about the same grant you might see at grants.ca.gov, but it has a quick like fact sheet or kind of dashboard on the grants, and it'll tell you whether the level of effort to apply is low, medium, or high, and the competitiveness, how it would rate the competitiveness of the grant. So we know that applying for grants can be very intensive. It can be a major barrier to accessing the funds, and recommend looking at the same grant on a couple of these different portals to try to get a better idea of eligibility and what it will require to apply. Because we want to be, aware of, cognizant of your time and your resources for applying. So.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Laura. There's, it can be a full-time job looking for funding, and then another full-time job applying for funding, and then another job to manage the money. But we've been very successful in this area, I think, by working together, so that, for example, IRWM grants are a collaborative grant program. We work together through the Watersheds Coalition to identify projects, and there's a single applicant for that grant, and we have consultants that help us manage it. But there's a lot of funding available right now, both from the state and federal grants, and also from the state budget. And we'll get a little bit more into that in the next slide. But yeah, signing up to be on these listservs and receiving email communication about what's available is really helpful. Okay, next slide. So for the kind of projects that we're talking about here, and these have already been brought up by most of you, we've already talked about these things, but Proposition 1 funding, it's currently we're at the end of Prop 1 IRWM grant funding. Later this year, we'll have a solicitation, or we'll be able to apply for projects in 2 pots of funding: disadvantaged community projects and non-disadvantaged community projects. And we have a fairly substantial amount of money across our funding area, $34.3 million for general implementation funded projects, and 6.37 million, I think, for disadvantaged community. We can have more than that minimum 6.3 for DAC projects. We could actually have all DAC projects if we want. And the beauty of DAC project funding is that there's no match requirement. So that's an important thing to for this group to understand, is many of the grants out there have waive match requirements for underserved communities. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do. So it behooves us to have our projects ready to go for that last round of funding, the ones that are applicable to this grant requirements and eligibility. And that amount of money I just said is shared across the funding area. It's not just for Ventura County. That's shared with the Upper Santa Clara and the Greater LA. Then there's state water board programs we've already referenced, the low interest revolving loan programs and grant programs. All of these are described on the California grants portal. Department of Water Resources has a lot of funding, and currently they are administering a lot of the state budget funds that were authorized in the budget last year for drought relief and for other things. And those funds are largely require no cost share or match. So that's also been beneficial for folks who are needing emergency or drought relief project funding. Cal EPA also has funding that can be beneficial to water projects or multi-benefit projects. The Strategic Growth Council is another state agency that, and now Office of Planning and Research, those two organizations at the state have a lot of money actually for climate resilience and capacity building in underserved communities. Then there's federal funding, the FEMA BRIC funds for building resilient communities, which is, I believe, some of that money is flowing through the California Office of Emergency Services and to the local level, to the local counties. So we're trying to stay on top of what's out there so that we can share that with you. And if you're on the email list for Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County, you get my messages fairly often when there's something available. I send that out to folks, so that's another source of information for you, is being on the WCVC list. And our contact information on the very last slide this morning, you'll be able to see Laura and I are two email addresses. Laura also has a list for the Santa Clara River watershed and sends out notifications about different grant programs that are beneficial for us. So we can't stay on top of all of them because there's so many, but we try to be a source of information for you as well. So there are others, and but probably too many to go into the details here. Laura, did you want to add anything? Other sources of funding?
No, I think I've got it all covered.
Right. All right, next slide. So here's a kind of a closer look at the State Water Board project funding that's not tied to IRWM. They've got, for some of their programs, it's an ongoing application cycle. There's not like a open and close date like many grants have. The requirements, of course, vary across programs. I think I want to take a second here to say that for those of you that have already dipped your toe into the realm of seeking grant funding, especially from the state, you'll see that there's a confusing array of different requirements across the different, even within one entity like the State Water Board or DWR, but especially across entities. So what might be required by a grant from the State Water Board might look different, and how they define an underserved community might look different than the DWR grants or grants from other state agencies. I didn't mention it, but there's also the Coastal Conservancy has funded a fair amount of projects in our county that are more on the habitat and recreation side of things. But so that is a challenge. It can be a challenge, but some of the programs that State Water Board administers are for water recycling, for small community wastewater and drinking water, for stormwater, and for groundwater. And there's a link at the bottom where you can look at, and this is Prop 1 non-IRWM grant funding. And then on the next slide, there's some more information. There is a lot of money available from the State Water Board. Technical assistance some of it we've already covered. There's funds, a lot of funds oriented towards groundwater right now. The drinking water revolving fund we've talked about, underground storage tank cleanup funding, stormwater abatement, non-point source pollution control. So there's a lot of, and some of those funds, their eligibility criteria, or the eligible entities vary. So I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with all of them, but some of them require a certain type of entity to apply. Okay, next slide. And then again, DWR has their programs that they manage. Their right now, they're one of the primary funders for groundwater. They distribute a lot of funding for under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requirements. There's a lot of funding for planning and projects, environmental restoration, flood management projects, IRWM, as we've talked about, water quality and drinking water, supply and management, and water use efficiency. DWR, many years ago, they were the state agency that was really funding a lot of water conservation and water use efficiency. And our county, some of you have been around for a while, the what used to be called Soil Conservation Service, now NRCS, and the RCDs have worked together for a long time to help improve efficiency for local, particularly agriculture, but also for large landscapes. Okay, next slide. So just some more funding available through, looks like the first two are administered by federal agencies, and the last one, the Resources Agency, has funding for creek, stream, and river parkway enhancements and flood protection. And I think I already mentioned the Coastal Conservancy, they would fall under that category. And there's some information there about how to access those websites. There's also the Bureau of Reclamation, which I don't think we've had listed on here. We've gotten a fair amount of funding in this region from Water Smart grants from the Bureau, and they've really, those grants are actually, I have to say, fairly straightforward to apply for. So that's been a good source of funding for projects in our region. I know this is a lot of information, but we're just trying to provide you a compendium of resources that you can go back to later. Next slide.
I think we actually had a poll question, Lynn, around this time. Is that right?
Yes.
Ask folks, now that we've presented so many different sources that are available, just wanted to get a sense of what people already know about, and if you scroll down on this poll, there's a second question asking which would you like to learn more about, if there was some more kind of focused information or conversations about accessing some of these funds. And again, this afternoon, there will be a really specific conversation about the current DAC funding that's available.
We have 5 responses. Wait, maybe another 30 seconds. Get your answers in. Okay, I'll share those results. Thanks to the 7 people who responded.
Yeah, so it looks like people have heard of all of these, but not Strategic Growth Council programs. and grants, which are a good, I guess, more recent source of the multi-benefit type projects, and some climate funding. So I think this is great for us to know on the team about some of the, maybe making more information available about those grant types. And then there's definitely an interest in learning about all of the types of grants, and more than others, the Cal EPA grant. So looks like folks want to hear about all the grant sources and all the opportunities. So with that, we thank you so much for answering those questions, and we'll turn it over to Boykin to talk specifically about the DAC funding available through the WaterTalks project.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit. What you've kind of heard to date is, a little more general and comprehensive. And what we're going to do now is talk a little more specifically about how WaterTalks can assist currently. And so this is just kind of a wrap up of where our program is. And so over toward the left, we've done a couple of rounds of outreach, more kind of education based. And then we've done, the surveys and interviews that we talked about. And we're now getting over into the right side of this diagram where we're actually trying to identify and promote projects for various types of funding that are kind of immediately available under our program, under the WaterTalks program. But remember, what you heard earlier was much more comprehensive. So we're kind of drilling down to, one way to think of it is, what can we do for you today? Is the way to think about this. And so Spence, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I want to throw things a little bit out of order here to speed it up, but if you could jump to slide 63, and then I'm going to come back to 58. But if we could jump to slide 63. Yeah, that's it. So with all of these programs that we were just talking about, all these different funding sources, they're generally looking at providing monies to build something, to create new infrastructure, to fix something that's broken. And, generally it's, going to result in some kind of construction. A lot of those funding sources, that's what they do. We've had some conversations about, well, IRWIM isn't built to fund scientific studies. It's built to fund construction, implementation. But I'm going to jump back and show you where there are opportunities for funding kind of non-traditional construction grant programs. But I want to start with the traditional construction grant application. And another term that you might hear this is shovel-ready projects. And so if you want to have your project considered for round 2 IRWIM funding later in the fall, you're going to have, basically a shovel-ready project. It's going to have a budget with a high-level budget that includes staff hours, rates, contractors, materials. It's going to have a scope of work, a project description, deliverables, management coordination activities. It's going to have milestones and dates and schedules, and narratives justifying both the schedules and the budget. There will, depending on which program, you could have fund specific paperwork, and then, to various degrees of completion, being able to conduct environmental reviews like CEQA, things like that. And then, descriptions of benefits. And so that can be a pretty tall lift, like some of those projects that Lynn was showing earlier, like the water infiltration under the soccer field. To get to this level of information, to apply for a construction grant to build that soccer field infiltration system, this is a lot of work. In some of our work and work that Holly does, to get to this level of information to apply for a construction grant, it can take a year and cost $500,000 to do the preliminary engineering, the sequel work. But this is kind of what we mean by shovel ready. And that's ultimately the goal. But Spence, if you could back up to 58. Oh, actually, one more down, sorry. Yeah, here. So what I'm going to talk about now is, again, what can WaterTalks do for you today? And we have 3 different tracks of funding and types of activity that we can help you with. And the first track is we currently have an RFP, a request for proposals out. It's due on the 18th, so there's still time. But this is probably the most flexible funding that we have. So one way to think about this, let's say that you have a kind of a traditional infrastructure improvement program that you'd like to pursue, but you're not shovel ready. This RFP, you can propose what it would take to get a shovel ready project to go into the consideration for IRWIM 2 construction funding. And so this can help you develop that first list of things that I was just describing, the budget and the scope and all that. So you can propose a project here that would get you to a shovel ready project that you could then apply for different construction funding from various sources, including IRWIM Round 2 or the State Revolving Fund. But then also this funding in the RFP, again, is more flexible because it will also fund programmatic activity. We had mentioned scientific studies earlier. Scientific studies are applicable in this RFP. So if you have a scientific study, you can put in a proposal in this RFP to implement that study. It can also be used in the list I showed earlier for developing educational material, creating community organization structure. So it's programmatic and not technical for construction, other than it can get you to a shovel ready project to apply for different sources for construction funding. And so we can help you do this. If you have ideas, my team, Isabel and Holly, depending on what kind of project it is, we can help you apply for this RFP. And the focus on the afternoon session, that's really important, is how do you respond to this current RFP for programmatic projects? So that's going to be worth seeing. And again, it's due on the 18th, and we would like to roll these out, in March to get things going. So Spence, we can go to the next one. So you can think of that as one bucket of money that has specific uses. The second track that we can help you with is relatively new. It came up very, very fast. And there has been a set aside for Ventura County. And we are currently looking for projects. Now, you see these due dates are coming up really, really quickly on this. So it's fast tracked. But what we need here, or what would be the best for us, would be to find shovel ready projects. So we don't have time to do the engineering, the CEQA, all of that work necessarily for this funding track. But if you have like a project that you've applied for funding and were rejected, or for whatever reason it wasn't funded, and it meets the urban and multi-benefit drought relief funding criteria, which Holly and I can help you determine, dust those off and contact us, because at this point, with this kind of deadline, we pretty much need projects that have an engineering description, costing, schedules, deliverables. So this is a request from this group, and reach out to other people if they're shovel-ready projects that didn't get funded through some other avenue. Bring them to us, and let's see if we can get them into this kind of accelerated track for funding. And I believe there is approximately $1 million in this second track. And Spence, we can jump to the next one. The third track is the IRWIM Round 2 funding. And again, you're going to need shovel-ready project descriptions to get into this consideration. And the RFP can help you get there. So if you have an idea for a project that is applicable to Irwin Round 2 funding, but it's not shovel ready, you can apply through the RFP to work with our teams to get you a shovel ready project for this third track, this third bucket of funding, which is the Irwin Round 2, which is currently kind of in the September timeframe. So, you know, if we could, if you have a project you'd like to get shovel ready, you know, put it in the RFP. If you win the RFP, then you'd work with Holly and us, and we would get your project ready for this tract of funding in September. So that's kind of the immediate things that we can do. And again, in the afternoon, we're going to go over how do you respond to the RFP? What do you need? Because that's the most immediate deadline. And so I hope you come back for that, because that's kind of the instruction on, you know, what do I actually do to get my my projects into one of these tracks. So that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So yeah, Spence, I think the last slide, the very, very last one, is the contact list. Yeah. And so if you have ideas related to any one of those tracks, get in touch with us, please. And if you have a shovel ready project that wasn't funded, get in touch with us and we'll see if we can qualify it. But that's all I had, Lynn.
Thank you, Boykin. That was great. That's, I'm sure, what a lot of people tuned in for today, was to hear that last part. So thank you all for your patience getting, you know, through all the preliminary stuff. Well, one thing we did want to do before we adjourn this session is to pull up the WaterTalks website and just familiarize you with the page that has, so this is the main landing page that you would come to when you go to WaterTalks. And there's lots of links and helpful information, but if you want to zoom into Ventura County, you'll see a page that has a lot of other stuff that we've been talking about today, including, you know, the announcement about today's session and the RFP that Boykin talked about, and then also the needs assessment report that was just published and uploaded for, still, I think it's considered a draft for folks to take a look at. It's a long document and it has a lot of some raw data in it, but also some good just graphic depictions of things. You saw some slides about it today. So we encourage you to take a look at that needs assessment report. You could dive deeper into community responses and the institutions that were interviewed for that. You can see how to get on the watersheds. Yeah, ways that you can contact us. And if you want to be on the mailing list, the email lists for any or all of the groups that are listed here, the group that Laura manages, the Santa Clara River Watershed Committee, the Ventura River Watershed Council, and then the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County. And if you scroll down a little bit, Spence, you can see these were the things produced for the outreach phase early on in this grant. There's toolkits with information in both English and Spanish about each of the communities that we've been featuring in this program, and also information about the events that were held in the past. So I believe we have Holly on from Friends of the Santa Clara River, and somebody was on from CAUSE earlier. Those are the two organizations that have been referenced today that are partners doing the work with the communities. We couldn't do it without them. And they were the ones that provided, fortunately, we were able to do some in person before we shut down with COVID. But if you're interested in referencing any of that, the past events, looking at those, and also the toolkits, here's where you'll find them. And more information, deeper dive into each community regarding resources, who to contact, and a lot of other really helpful information. So thank you, PlaceWorks. PlaceWorks put that together as well. And you'll see the look is similar to the look on our presentation material today. So thank you, Spence. Just wanted to point that out to everybody.
Thank you, Lynn and everyone. It's a little past time and I know this webinar has an afternoon session. We're going to leave the contacts information page up during the lunch hour, and we hope that people will be back with us. So feel free. I think all the presenters are going to turn off their cameras and mute, and we'll just come back, or you are welcome to log back on. But really it will be extremely useful for answering some of the specific funding questions. I think Boykin will be available to answer anything about the accessing some of the funds that he just presented. So we hope you will join us, and we hope other people that weren't available in the morning will join in the afternoon. So hopefully we have that. And we have a schedule of from 1 to 2:30, but we actually think we will be wrapping up a little earlier than that, depending on the amount of conversation and questions. But we have about 30 minutes of presentation this afternoon. But look forward to seeing everyone there.
Isabel, I see that there's a question there now. Is that something, Boykin, if you're still on, if you want to address Rocio's question? Or people can tune off if they want now, but we're going to leave this open. So I just wanted to call out that question.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, Lynn. What is it?
Oh, maybe it was to me. Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry. Can track 1 proposal be for a needs assessment of specific DAC site?
yes, if selected. So we've done a pretty comprehensive needs assessment, but we know that there's another level of needs assessment that we didn't get to. And so, for instance, we could do an income survey to qualify a community that's on the edge of the income spectrum for qualification, things like that. So I think, again, it's a competitive RFP, but technically that type of project would be under consideration.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're still there? Okay, good. I'm glad you're still on.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you,
See you
everyone.
later.
Yeah.
We'll see you this afternoon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we let folks have a couple extra minutes to come back. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I think Boykin is going to just give a little intro to this afternoon session. Are you here, Boykin?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Yeah, so kind of following how we ended the early session, what we're going to get into now is kind of the nuts and bolts of what you need to do to get involved today. And what we're going to do is we're going to have Ben from Cal State Northridge actually walk you through the online RFP form. So to respond to this RFP, it's all online. And you basically will go to a URL and basically start filling out the questions that Ben's going to go over here in a minute. But remember, with the 3 tracks of funding, this form is for the first track, the RFP, the one that I described as the most flexible funding that we have. And so, again, this RFP, you can look at educational type programs, you can look at outreach, organization, community organization type programs. Then studies, we had mentioned studies, scientific studies, things like that. And then even more granular user needs. But then remember, the RFP can also help you get shovel ready for the IRWIM round 2. And so that's another thing that this RFP can do. And we can help you. And so if you have a project idea and you kind of know what needs to go in the form, but you don't know how to determine the benefits of the project, reach out to us in between Isabel and her PlaceWorks team and my team and Holly's team and Ben, we can help you fill out this form. So if you have ideas and don't have the time or the expertise to do it, just let us know. So that service is available under the WaterTalks program. And so just so remember, if you have a programmatic like outreach or studies, you know, that this is the appropriate place to respond. If you have a construction project, but it's not shovel ready, this would be the appropriate place to respond. And then remember, if you do have shovel ready or near shovel ready projects, we also want to talk to you, because that is applicable to that fast track 2 that we talked about with the urban multi-benefit drought relief funding. And so if you have something that's shovel ready or near, let us know and we'll see if we can qualify it. And again, so this is going to basically show you how to respond to the RFP. And again, Ben is just going to pull up the website. He's going to familiarize you with the components of the RFP that need to be filled out. And then he'll show you some of the key parts within the actual web form. And this RFP website is available on that WaterTalks website right now. So, you know, go back and look at some of the project types that we talked about really early on that Lynn showed. Think about some of the things that we learned from the surveys and the interviews about what kinds of projects the communities generally support and need. And then reach out and brainstorm with us to see if we can come up with a proposal and help you get it into the RFP. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he's going to actually show you what you need to do to get into the Track 1 RFP funding program.
Great, thanks for the background and introduction, Boykin. As Boykin mentioned, my name is Ben Cho. I'm a project manager at the Center for Geospatial Science and Technology at Cal State Northridge, or CSUN. And our team at CGST was responsible for building the online project description form based off discussions we had and feedback that we received from the groups that you've already heard from today, as well as other collaborative partners in the WaterTalks effort. In this module, I will be sharing my screen and filling out the form using a fictitious example project so that you can better understand the type of information that we're looking for, as well as see how to enter your project information into the form and be considered for funding under the track that Boykin discussed earlier. If at any point you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or enter your question into the chat. There are some useful links on this slide, including a link to the online form, an email address to contact if you run into any issues or have questions as you fill out the form, as well as a link to a manual to help with filling out the form. And I'll also be posting, well, there's the manual right there. Thank you, Gina. I'll also be posting the link to the project description form, as well as the email address for Miranda as well. There you go. And with that, let's get to the website and the form. Can everyone see the form on my screen? Okay. So this is the online project description form that, as Boykin mentioned, you will be filling out to submit your projects or your project ideas for funding consideration. And the beginning of the form is some simple instructions, again, including an email link if you have any questions or run into any issues while you're filling out the form. There's also a few sentences mentioning that some of the questions are required, and they are marked accordingly with this bold required notation. And for optional questions, so those are questions that aren't marked as required, it's up to you if you want to answer them. So for example, you see here the first question, project title, that's required. The second question, project website, it's not required. So if you did have a project website, you wanted to include it, you would add it in that question. The last part of the top of the form also mentions that there's a section at the bottom to enter contact information to receive an email with a link where you can view and update your answers at a later time if you need to. And we'll be talking about that section at the end of the demonstration so you can see how that works. And as we go through each of the questions on this form, I will be entering information for an example stormwater capture project in a neighborhood called Green Acres to illustrate how to fill out the form. So these first few questions are asking for basic information about your project proposal. The project title should be fairly self-explanatory, but you should try to describe the overall project and keep it short if possible. So for this example, we're going to put in Green Acres Flooding Reduction Project. For the second question on the project website, again, that's optional. So you would only enter that information if you did have a website for the project. For this example, there's no website, so we will leave it blank. For question 3 on the project abstract, you really want to summarize what your project is about and why it's important. And for this particular question, you should try to be concise since you only have 750 characters. You will be able to expand upon the information that you put here in question 5, which is the project description. And this question 5, you have a lot more room. So for question 3, just sort of like a snippet about what your project is about, try to keep it short and simple. So for our example project, we just have 2 sentences talking about what the issue is that the project is addressing. So flooding of a major artery in the Green Acres neighborhood, which creates hazardous conditions for drivers, pedestrians, and school buses. And then our proposed project idea, which is converting a vacant lot near the main intersection to a wetland park to capture stormwater and divert it from the neighboring streets. Question 4 is asking you about the project type, and eligible project types were discussed in this morning session. So if you missed that or need a refresher, I encourage you to watch that recording when it's available. So you would choose the project type that best describes your project, and we have examples of different project types here to help you determine what fits your project. For this particular example project, we will be selecting site assessment since this project is seeking funding to help gather site-specific data needed to help design the park. Question 5 is, again, the project description. So we're going to expand upon what we put in the project abstract box. So that was question 3. So for this project description, you can really go into a lot of detail on the problem that your project seeks to address, proposed project activities, intended outcomes, any partners or collaborators on the project, your anticipated project benefits, deliverables, costs, timeline, etc. So really anything that you feel is relevant and that we should know about your project. So for our example project, I'm just going to copy and paste our description. So for our description for this example, we really provide some background about the neighborhood. So it consists primarily of low-income households that then the neighborhood experiences flooding during rainfall events. We talk about how the flooding affects the road and adjacent sidewalks, and that's increased maintenance and repair costs for the local public works department. This next section is just talking about the idea of converting the vacant lot to a wetland park to capture stormwater and divert it. And then it talks about some of the benefits of the park. So in addition to mitigating flooding, the park will provide recreational opportunities in dry weather as well as serve as wildlife habitat. And then there's also some discussion of the city working closely with the local community-based organization to help receive feedback on the design of the park, and then some more details about the site assessment and what it's trying to achieve, and then some basic information on the estimated cost of the site assessment and the amount of time it would take to undergo and finish that assessment. The next question is asking if you have any additional attachments, so any files of relevant project documents such as photos, other materials, plans and specs, feasibility studies, or needs assessments. For example, we are just going to include a photo of the flooded intersection. And we attached it there. For question 7, you would select one or more deliverables that apply to the project. And there are some specific deliverables listed here. If there are any deliverables that are not listed here, you can select other, and then you can type in the specific deliverable that you expect to have as an outcome of this project. The manual that I referenced at the beginning also includes some examples of other deliverables such as test results, GIS maps, etc. So I encourage you to refer to that manual if you're interested in learning more about other possible deliverables that you could mention here. For this example, we are going to select study and project designs. For question 8 on project benefits, you would select one or more benefits that apply to your project. There are also examples included here next to the different benefit categories to help you pick the benefits that might apply to your project. And if you're not sure of the project's benefits, agency collaborators that you might be working with and technical assistance groups can help you identify possible benefits associated with your project. And some of those agencies and technical assistance groups were discussed during the morning session. So for this example, stormwater capture project, there are many anticipated benefits, including improved climate adaptation or carbon sequestration, water supply resilience, habitat improvement, improvements in groundwater quality and or quantity, reductions in flood hazards, and also recreational access and use. The next few questions are asking about the applicant that is seeking funding. So question 9 is the name of the organization or agency applying for funding. And this morning session and the manual will also identify the eligible applicant types for funding. So if you have any questions about whether or not your organization is eligible, please refer to those resources. For this example, the entity is the public agency, so it is the city of Greentown. So we're going to put that here. Question 10 is just the address. Question 11 is asking for a contact name at the entity applying for funding. So we're going to put in the fictitious public works director for the city of Greentown here. His fake email address for question 13, and then a contact number for him in question 14. The next section is asking about partners or collaborators on this project. These are other organizations or agencies that are working with you on your project idea. So it could include non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, consultants, for example. And for this example project, we mentioned in the description that the city is working with the local community organization, Greening Greentown, and that partner is helping them to gather feedback on potential project design. So we would include them here as a partner or collaborator. So I'm going to put in the name of the organization in question 15, their address in question 16, the name of the contact for that organization, their title, email address in question 19, and then a contact phone number for them in question 20. And if you had more than one partner or collaborator on your project, you would list the others here in question 21. And again, you would include the same information. So the name of the agency or organization, their address, the name of a contact person, and then the contact information for that individual. In question 22, you enter any stakeholders not identified above as official partners or collaborators. And the community support section of this morning's session included a list of possible stakeholders, and the manual does as well. So feel free to consult those resources if you need help in identifying potential stakeholders. For this example project, the neighborhood HOA has an interest in the project since local homeowners and residents will be affected directly by the project. So we are going to include the fictitious HOA president here, Matt Black. The next few questions are about the location of the project. So question 23, you would enter the location or address of the project if applicable, and this may not apply to all project types or concepts. So feel free to leave this blank if there's not a physical address associated with your project. For this example, we're just going to put the intersection where the vacant lot is located. That's going to be converted to a wetland park. And you'll notice as I'm putting in information here, the form will automatically suggest addresses. So you can pick one if the correct one shows up. If the right address doesn't show up, you can just enter your own and leave whatever information you put in. So you don't have to select one of these if it's not correct. So the next few questions can be a little confusing, but the information is important as it will be used to generate data about your proposed project, such as the median household income of the households that are served by your project, as well as using this information to identify any local issues or concerns that have been mentioned by community members. And those types of information will be used in the project evaluation and selection process. So it's important to try to get this project sphere of influence as right as you can. So a project sphere of influence is the geographic area that is either affected by the project or that the project serves. So really think about what is the area that is directly benefiting from your potential project, and that should help guide you in the direction of picking the right answers for this section. So for our example, we're going to say that the project sphere of influence is the entire city boundary of Greentown, since the reduction in flooding has benefits for residents and commuters across the city, not only the residents directly living in the Green Acres neighborhood. So we will select yes for question 24. So question 24 is asking if the sphere of influence is a predefined boundary type or an area with defined boundaries. Since cities have very well-defined boundaries in terms of their city limits, we select yes for question 24, and then we will answer questions 25 and 26, since we're prompted here. Other predefined boundaries could include counties, urban regions, water systems, service areas, school districts, zip codes, for example. For question 25, we will select the boundary type that applies to the project. In this example, since it's the city limits, we will pick city, but there are other examples here, as I mentioned, county, urban region, water service provider, school district, zip code. And you can also select other and then type in the boundary type that applies to your project. So we will pick city for question 25. For question 26, you would enter the name of the predefined boundary. For our example, we would put in the city's name, so the city of Greentown, California. So question 27 would only be completed if we had entered no to question 24. So if we had said that the project sphere of influence didn't adhere to a predefined boundary, then we would put no for question 24, and as instructed, we would then answer question 27. So in question 27, we would explain why a predefined boundary doesn't apply, and then describe the boundary in more detail. And if applicable, we could then draw the boundary in this web application that launches. And it really should be an exception that your project sphere of influence doesn't adhere to a predefined boundary. I think in almost all cases, it would adhere to a known boundary. So I guess hypothetically for this example, if we had said that this wetland park only directly benefited the Green Acres neighborhood, we would explain why that is the case in question 27. We would then describe the rough boundaries of the neighborhood, and then using this link, we could draw the exact boundaries of the neighborhood on this map. So I'm just gonna zoom into a random part of Ventura County. Let's see. So for example, if we said that this area was the Green Acres neighborhood, to draw the custom boundary, you would click on New Feature, and then you would click on the boundaries of that neighborhood. So we're just going to follow this street, just clicking along as we follow the street. And then once you reach the final edge, you double click, and then a pop-up shows up asking you to put in information about your project. And this is so that we can track these custom project boundaries and associate with them with the right project. So we're going to put in the name of the project, the name of the city that is applying for funding, and then select the project type, which is a site assessment. And then, oops. And then it should be saved in there. So again, if you have any questions or need help figuring out the project sphere of influence, please contact Miranda Moore, who will then help connect you with the right resources to figure out that sphere of influence. The next section is related to the budget or cost of the project, which may be known or you may not know it yet. So question 28 is about the total project cost, asking if you know it, you don't know it, or if you need help determining the project cost. For our example, we know the cost of that site assessment, so we're going to put amount known. Question 29, you would enter the total project cost, and if you need help determining the cost or developing a budget, you can contact us using the link here. For our example, we know that the site assessment costs $10,000, so we'll put 10,000 here. For the next few questions about matching resources, we're really asking if the project is receiving matching funds from another source. So this could include the local match required under some grant funding sources, but as Lynn mentioned this morning, this particular funding program doesn't have a local match requirement. Since these few questions don't apply to this particular example project, we'll just leave them blank. So there is no matching entity, there's no matching dollar amount. If you did have a matching resource, you'd enter the name of the organization here, the amount of the match. And then question 32 is asking about the level of commitment from that matching agency or resource. So planned refers to sources of funding that you are seeking, but that have not been committed or promised by the grantor. Pledged means funding that has been promised but not yet guaranteed. And then secured would refer to funding that has been awarded but possibly not received yet. And if you need help or assistance determining which one applies, there's also an option for you to select here. In question 33, if you had more than one matching resource, you would enter the additional resources here, again, with the name of the agency or resource, the matching amount, and then the commitment level for that match. Questions 34, 35, 36, and 37 are asking about post-grant funding. So that would be funding for ongoing operations and maintenance that is separate from funding for construction. For this particular example project, that's not applicable since it's very early on in the development process. So we'll be leaving these questions blank, but they follow the same structure as the matching resource question. So the name of the agency or resource, the amount of the funding, and then the level of commitment. And again, question 37, if you had more than one post-grant funding source, you would enter the additional sources in this question in this box. Question 38 is about estimated annual operations and maintenance costs. So if you knew those for your project, you could enter them here. For our example project, that's not yet known, so we're going to leave it blank. For question 39, if you knew the exact cost per deliverables associated with your project, you can download an Excel template that is linked here, fill it out and attach it. I'm just going to show an example of what that template looks like. So you can see here, this is that template. And if you had a more specific breakdown of the different tasks and deliverables and the costs associated with them, you could enter them into the spreadsheet and then save it on your computer and attach it here. The next few questions are asking about the schedule for the deliverables for your project. Question 40 is asking if the project that is seeking technical assistance or project development support can be completed by December 2022. And I believe this is the completion deadline for projects funded by this particular grant program. So for our example site assessment project, we know that it can be completed in 3 months, and that's before the end of this year. So we would select yes. And then question 41 is asking for the estimated duration in months of either the technical assistance training or project development support being requested. Again, we know that the site assessment would take 3 months, so we're going to enter 3 for question 41. For question 42, if you had a timeline for the milestones for your project, you could, again, there's a template document that you can download at this link, fill it out, and then attach it here. And I will just show you what that looks like. So this is the template for the project timeline, milestones that you could enter, and then deliverables as well if you already had that determined. And then this last section of the form is very important. So as I mentioned in the beginning, you can put in contact information for either the person that's filling out the form or whoever you want to receive an email with a link to be able to edit the responses to the question. So for this example, I'm going to put in my information, my email address. And then this last question, question 45, is asking if you are done filling out the form. So if you don't plan to edit or update your answers, you would choose yes here. If you haven't finished answering all of the questions or you want to be able to change your responses later on, you would choose no. Since I'm done filling out this form, I'm going to select yes and then submit. And then I should be receiving an email with a link to the form responses. I'm going to pull up what that looks like. So after you submit the form, you should receive an email that looks like this that includes a link that you can click on to return to your responses. And then there's also information for Miranda if you have any questions. So I think that is the demonstration of the form, and hopefully that helps you as you enter information for your own projects. And if you have questions as you fill out the form, please feel free to refer to the manual or email us. And I know the session is also being recorded, so you can view it later on as you're filling out the form to help you with that process. So before, yeah, go ahead.
Ben, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
You can, when you complete your form, you hit submit. And you probably know that we're also using a very similar form for our project input for our Prop 1 process. And it's a survey 123 also. And we struggled a little bit with giving people access to go back in and update the data. Once somebody submits this, is there a way for them to go back in and edit it?
Yeah, so that email link that I just showed, so this one is another example, so it won't work, but in theory, you'd be able to click on this link and it would just pull up the information that I had just entered, and you could edit it and then click submit at the bottom, which would save it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it looks like you have a question about whether people can take a look at the questions, what they're going to have to fill out before they actually start, so they could maybe be gathering their data before they get into the form.
Yeah, so right now it's only available online, but you can use the link and see all of the questions on one page, so you don't even have to start filling it out, and you can get a sense for the type of information that we're asking for and start compiling it.
Yeah, and then the manual would have all of that in it also.
That's correct too, yes. That's a good point, Boykin. Yeah, so the manual that we linked to has screenshots, I believe, for the entire form, so you'd also be able to see the exact questions in that manual. Are there any other questions about filling out the form? Okay, if not, I will turn things over, I think, to Spence for the final poll.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so again, we can help you with that. So if you have, questions like with the sphere of influence or the budget, things like that, we can help you put together estimates and are ready to do that.
Okay, I'm going to launch this final poll. It just asks a few questions about how helpful the webinar was for you all, and how it can continue to be of help to you in the future. Okay, we'll wait just a few more seconds. If you're answering, go ahead and submit.
So while people are finishing that, we're going to be posting the recording on the WaterTalks site on the Ventura page. Is that right?
Right.
Yes, we can do that. So it looks like the workshop was helpful to most people. And some people still have questions, and that's okay. That's what we're here for, to help answer. Hopefully you got our contacts. We'll make that available to you. And all of these types of support would be welcome going forward. It's good to see.
Did we answer the question, the question in the chat about the form questions available in a PDF or text document?
Yeah, probably the best version of text would be the manual that Ben referenced.
Okay.
So I want to just add a note here. A lot of you are on our disadvantaged community involvement or disadvantaged community committee for the Watersheds Coalition. And we didn't really get into the process from here about decision making and how what happens in the next few months as far as selecting projects. And we'll be sharing that. We share that with the committee in the next, we'll have another meeting coming up already, the 16th of this month. So, but if people are not on that list and would like to be and would like to participate in those conversations when we start looking at the projects that come in and making some decisions about how to spend the resources of the grant in these different tracks, there's going to be a lot of decision making that has to happen. And the DAC committee is the starting point for that, and we will be deliberating and making recommendations, and that will be then those recommendations go to the full, well, to the steering committee, and then, I mean, I can map this out later, but we have a sort of chain of decision making that happens for the different grants. It's different for each grant, but so if you would like to be part of those discussions, reviewing all the projects that come in and being able to vote on which projects you think are the most appropriate use of the funds, assuming that we get more requests than we have funding for, I'd like to welcome you to participate in that. And you can email me or Laura, and our email address was at the end of that last slide presentation from the morning, and ask to be added to the list for that committee. And then you'll get invitations to the meetings, and we'll get into more of a description of how the process works. But it's going to move quickly. As Boykin said, we have to make decisions about that funding for the drought relief that's going to be due to the state the middle of March. And if we've got anything that fits that, that we want to include for that set aside funding, then that's coming quickly. And then the next, there'll be other opportunities, but September through November, December is the time frame for the second round of Prop 1. And there will be a lot of meetings that will happen around looking at the projects. Laura, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
I'm looking at Rocio's question, 2 projects. Oh, yes, absolutely. Do you want to take that one, Boykin?
Sure. we kind of officially, we have Miranda Moore in my office, and she's kind of a broker. And so, you know, she would read what the questions are and then talk with myself and Lynn about how to respond to it or who on our team should respond. So that's how I would suggest we start, and her contact for the Cal State team is on that list. But also that slide has all of our contacts on it. So if you're more comfortable talking directly to Lynn about what your options might be, or to me, you know, feel free to reach out to us. But generally we would want, you know, all of the questions to start with Miranda, and then she can work with our diverse teams to figure out who is the best person on our team to respond.
And you're talking about Rocio's question about
Yeah.
choosing between different projects. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
And, you know, again, like with Holly on our team, you know, she's been doing this for a long time, and she can help you say, this one's probably fundable, this one probably not. So we can definitely help you with that.
Great. Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so reach out to Miranda, and that'll get you in the hopper, and we'll have probably Holly reach out to you.
And I understand not having the resources or time to fill out, you know, for more than one project, but hopefully maybe we can at least get a little information on the second project, so we can at least document that for potential future, you know, opportunities. And I mean, I think that's the goal. Even if you have a conceptual project or something that's not very well fleshed out, or you don't have time to put, you know, energy towards it right now, we'd still like to know what the interests are from the community, so, you know, we can help try to connect those projects with funding in the future.
Yeah, that's actually the same path that we always take with the IRWM grants. Is we really are looking for project ideas and concepts, as well as shovel ready, you know, fleshed out projects. So, you know, don't hesitate if you have lots of ideas that you think could take form at some time in the near future, put them in there, and, you know, it's as a placeholder, if nothing else. And then, are the required questions pretty limited? I mean, somebody can go in and just put in ideas for a project they'd like to do without answering most of the questions, right?
That's correct. Yeah, there's only a few that are required.
So, you know, please do that. And then the more information you put in there about your thoughts, the easier it will be for anybody that's taking a look at those projects and giving you some advice.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This has been wonderful. You guys have worked for for a very long time, and it's coming along beautifully.
Thank you, Rocio. Well, I would like to thank the whole team that put this together. And Laura and I just sort of came along after it was all framed up and added some thoughts. But this, you know, PlaceWorks and Boykin and his team and Holly, everybody, you know, really is pulling all the technical information together. That's one of the most important aspects of this grant, is that we're being able to bring you training and keep the conversation going. You know, Laura and I are your local contacts, as well as Holly with Friends of the Santa Clara River and folks from CAUSE. I don't know if Cameron is on, but I think somebody's on from CAUSE today, maybe a couple of people. We're the local folks that if you are looking for support or, you know, getting some ideas together, you can come to us too. But really our grant team, consultant team are doing, you know, most of the work, and we really appreciate all they're doing.
Well, thank you, Lynn and Laura, and everyone else. And thanks to everybody for attending. And again, this everything will be on the links that we sent. I think we put the presentation link again in the chat here. And for those that logged off and back on, I don't think you can see the chat from earlier in the day. So before we log off, if anybody has any last remaining questions or requests. And then, of course, we are available following today for any support.
I have another thought about, we'll be doing more webinars like this on different subjects. Is there going to be a schedule posted on the WaterTalks site? Or I guess we just post them each time we get one scheduled, but I know we're going to be doing some training for the water providers, I think. And we have a number of webinars planned, number of training opportunities. So is the best thing just for people to keep tuning back into the WaterTalks website and seeing what's new?
Yeah, for now, Lynn, we're kind of have postponed a couple of the pamphlets because of the pending deadline with the urban and multi-benefit program. But we'll get that back on track very shortly. But like Lynn was saying, we're going to have instruction on how to participate in an Irwin process, how to fill out a state revolving fund application with the water board, how to better interact with tribal communities. So there's some other things that are coming up, but we'll get those scheduled kind of when we get a handle on the immediate deadline of the urban multi-benefit program. Yeah, so we'll have more and get a more comprehensive schedule coming up shortly.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and for I think everyone here, but if you did not get an e-blast or multiple e-blasts announcing today's event, please send us your email. We have a list. We try not to overuse it, but definitely when there's an event coming up, we do send out e-blasts or emails from the WaterTalks email address. So you'll see those come into your inbox as well.
Wow, no more questions? Well, we're definitely ending a little earlier than we thought, and that's great. Everybody's got plenty of other things to do today, I'm sure. But thank you to everybody on the team for putting this together, and more importantly, thank you to all of you out there participating in this program and for all the hard work that you do in your communities. We greatly appreciate that.